10 years after 3/11. The lessons of Fukushima.
Nuclear power must be well run, not ditched.
Nuclear power must be well run, not ditched.
It has been 10 years
It has been 10 years
since a tsunami laid waste the Pacific coast of North Honshu.
It has been 10 years since a tsunami laid waste the Pacific coast of northern Honshu,
Japan's most populous island.
Japan's most populous island.
The tsunami and the undersea earthquake which triggered it,
The tsunami and the undersea earthquake which triggered it,
the largest ever recorded in the region,
the largest ever recorded in the region,
killed nearly 20,000 people,
killed nearly 20,000 people,
destroyed over 100,000 homes,
destroyed over 100,000 homes,
and threw the lives of tens of millions into turmoil.
The direct economic cost, estimated at over $200 billion,
was larger than that of any other natural disaster the world has seen.
was larger than that of any natural disaster the world has seen. And yet, for many around the world,
the event is remembered for just one thing.
The event is remembered for just one thing:
the ensuing crisis at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
the ensuing crisis of Fukushima
The earthquake cut the plant off the source of outside electricity. The earthquake cut the plant off the outside source of electricity. The tsunami easily topped the plant's seawalls,
flooding the underground bunkers
containing its underground bunkers containing its emergency generators. A foreseeable risk that Japan's neutered regulators had failed to foresee.
Because there was no way to cool the reactor cores,
the nuclear fuel within them began to melt.
The nuclear within them began to melt.
Amid fire, explosion, and alarming amounts of radiation.
Amid explosion, fire, and alarming amounts of radiation.
A puddle from hell began eating into the plant's concrete foundations.
A puddle from hell began eating into the plant's concrete foundation.
The world looked on aghast.
In Shanghai and San Francisco,
iodine tablets and iodized salt jumped off from the shelf.
As people look for which they have no need. Prophylaxis. As people look for prophylaxis of which they had no need.
In Germany, the Chancellor Angela Merkel, who only stood with business leaders.
In Germany, the Chancellor Angela Merkel, who long stood with business leaders against the country's strong anti-nuclear movements, ordered its reactors to phase out.
In China, the world's largest new nuclear plant program. In China, the world's largest new nuclear plant program was put on hold.
Talk of a nuclear renaissance to fight climate change fell silent.
Talk of a nuclear renaissance to fight the climate change fell silent.
The reaction, though understandable, was wrong.
The reaction, though understandable, was wrong.
Nuclear power has a lot of drawbacks.
Nuclear power has a lot of drawbacks.
Its large, slowly built plants are expensive,
Its large, slowly built plants are expensive,
both in absolute terms and in terms of the electricity they produce.
both in absolute terms and in terms of the electricity they produce.
Its small but real risk of catastrophic failures
Requires a high level of regulation.
and it has a disturbing history of regulatory capture,
Amply demonstrated in Japan.
It produces extremely long-lived and toxic waste.
It produces a extremely long-lived and toxic waste.
And it is associated with proliferation of nuclear weapons.
And it is associated with proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Most of the countries outside Europe that use nuclear power
Has some history of developing a bomb.
All these factors contribute to an unease with the technology,
Felt to greater or lesser extent by people all around the world.
Against that, though, two things must be remembered. Against that, though, two things must be remembered.
Against all that, though, two things must be remembered.
One is that well-regulated nuclear power is safe.
One is that well-regulated nuclear power is safe.
With the terrible Soviet-era exception of Chernobyl,
With the terrible Soviet-era exception of Chernobyl,
nuclear disasters come without large death tolls.
nuclear disasters come without large death tolls.
It was the tsunami, not radiation,
It was the tsunami, not radiation,
that claimed nearly all those lives in Fukushima.
that claimed nearly all those lives in Fukushima.
The other is that the climate is in crisis.
And nuclear plants can supply some of those
And nuclear plants can supply some of the vast amounts of emissions-free electricity
the world needs if it is to cope.
Solar and wind power are now much cheaper, but they are intermittent.
Providing a reliable grid is a lot easier.
Some of its generating capacity can be assumed to be available at all the times.
Nuclear provides such capacity with no ongoing emissions.
And it is doing so safely and at scale around the world. Despite this, safe and productive nuclear plants are being closed across the rich world.
Despite all this, safe and reliable nuclear nuclear power plants are being closed around the rich world.
Those closures and retirement of older sites
Mean that advanced economies could lose two-thirds of their nuclear capacity by 2040.
mean that rich countries could lose two-thirds of their nuclear capacity by 2040, according to the International Energy Agency.
If the new fossil fuel infrastructure fills the gap,
it will last for decades.
If renewables do so,
the opportunity cost will be measured in gigatons of carbon.
Renewables replacing nuclear capacity
would be almost always be better used when replace would almost always be better to be would always be better deployed to replace fossil fuels.
Sometimes the closure of nuclear power plants is largely a matter of economics.
In places where emitting carbon dioxide comes with no price, like America,
the benefits of being emissions free are hidden from the market.
that hurts nuclear and it should be rectified.
When the closure is political, the onus is on green politicians
to change their tune.
To hasten the decline of nuclear power
is willfully to hobble the world in greatest environmental struggle of all.
The argument for keeping existing nuclear power plants open
has been strengthened in some places
by one of the responses to Fukushima.
Greater independence for nuclear regulators.
Britain granted new freedom to its regulators after 2011.
So did Japan.
The grander hopes for the reform bore little fruit. The grander hopes for the reform after the tsunami bore little fruit. Japan did largely take the regulator's hand from the power company's glove. Its new supervisors had made the reopening of mothballed power plants harder than the government would like. But that's it as it should be. In Japan more than anywhere. Nuclear needs to earn back trust to be useful. This points to nuclear's greatest weakness. In democracies, it is expensive owing to in democracies, it is expensive owing to regulation and public antipathy, which makes new nuclear power a hard sell. The technology is thus increasingly becoming the preserver of autocracies. Precisely the systems where good regulation is least likely. Having paused after Fukushima, China's nuclear plant has accelerated as part of an effort to reduce reliance on coal. China produced 4 times as much nuclear energy in 2019 as it did in 2011. It has 16 nuclear reactors under construction and 39 in plan. Countries wanting new nuclear plants. Now look to China and Russia as suppliers. There is a strong case for democracies seeking to replace old nuclear plants with non-intermittent equivalents to join the importers. If Chinese reactors are designed in the knowledge that they will have to meet with the approval of independent regulators, the world would be a safer place. At the same time, in boosting energy R&D to tackle the climate crisis, Western governments should be sure to give nuclear a fair share. Western governments should be sure to give nuclear its fair share. There are real attractions to some new approaches. Notably smaller reactors with lower unit costs. In platoons, they can replace old plants. Singly, they could add capacity where needed, incremental capacity where needed. They might perhaps be used to retrofit old power plants. Nuclear power has drawbacks the size of a tsunami. But with Chinese plants being built today, they will not be decommissioned until 22nd century. It cannot simply be wished away. What's more, it has a vital role to play in the fight against climate change. The lesson of Fukushima is not to eschew nuclear power. It is to use it wisely.